The Contingency, a declassified history, 2049 to 2065. Act 1, The Pathogene Mars.
Humanity's first interplanetary colony, established 2055. Population at founding, 340 souls. By 2058, Earth had stopped answering. This is the account of why they left, and what they found when they arrived. The Aschenfeld Agent was first reported in southern China in late 2049. Initial symptoms included fever, respiratory failure, and a mortality rate of approximately 12% among documented cases. Within 6 months, the pathogen had spread to every major population center on Earth. Standard containment measures failed. Quarantine protocols, developed over decades of pandemic preparation, proved inadequate. The pathogen's transmission vectors were difficult to trace. Carriers remained asymptomatic for extended periods, spreading infection before detection was possible. By mid-2050, hospitals in multiple countries reported critical shortages of medical supplies, oxygen, and personnel. International coordination collapsed rapidly. Border closures were enacted unilaterally. Supply chains fragmented. Major urban centers experienced shortages of food, fuel, and clean water. Governments declared states of emergency, but enforcement mechanisms broke down as military and civil service personnel deserted or succumbed to illness. Environmental conditions worsened in parallel. Polar ice melt accelerated beyond projected models. Equatorial droughts intensified. Agricultural yields declined sharply due to both climatic instability and workforce depletion. Synthetic agriculture programs dependent on specialized equipment and trained operators failed to scale in time to offset losses. By 2051, satellite imagery showed urban centers going dark. Power grids failed in sequence as maintenance crews abandoned their posts. Communications infrastructure deteriorated. Internet connectivity became sporadic, then ceased entirely in multiple regions. The global population declined by an estimated 30 to 40% within 18 months. Though accurate census data was no longer being collected, rural populations fared marginally better. Isolated communities, able to sustain themselves through local agriculture, survived longer. However, these settlements remained vulnerable to roving groups seeking resources, leading to armed conflicts documented in sporadic radio transmissions intercepted by remaining government listening posts. Official narratives during this period emphasized resilience and international cooperation. Public broadcasts continued to air reassurances from government officials and health organizations. Behind these statements, however, classified communications revealed a different reality. Internal memos, later declassified, documented preparations for large-scale evacuation of select personnel to orbital facilities. The Space Infrastructure Coalition, a consortium formed in the 2040s to coordinate private and governmental space efforts, pivoted from commercial operations to contingency planning. Orbital construction yards, originally intended for satellite assembly and research platforms, were repurposed for the construction of long-duration habitation modules. Public statements described these efforts as experimental Mars colonization missions. Internal documents classified under Level Delta clearance confirmed their true purpose: preservation of select human populations in the event of total terrestrial collapse. By 2052, the first prototype ark-class vessels were under construction. These craft, derived from modified Starship designs developed in the 2020s, were equipped with closed-loop life support systems, hydroponic farming modules, radiation shielding, and environmental controls. Publicly, they were described as cargo haulers for Mars resupply missions. Privately, they were designated survival arks. The selection of personnel for these missions was conducted using algorithmic frameworks designed to maximize genetic diversity, technical expertise, and operational capability. Ethical review boards, traditionally responsible for oversight of human subject research, were bypassed under emergency authority provisions. Independent oversight committees were quietly dissolved. Launch manifests from this period, recovered from orbital databanks in 2087, confirmed that significant numbers of high-value individuals were relocated to orbital staging areas between 2052 and 2054. These transfers were timed to coincide with peaks in urban contagion, minimizing the likelihood of public observation. The final phase of terrestrial evacuation began in late 2054. Convoys of specialized transport vehicles moved personnel and equipment to launch sites under armed escort. Destinations were not disclosed publicly. Satellite tracking data, declassified decades later, documented ascent trajectories consistent with orbital rendezvous maneuvers rather than suborbital research flights. By early 2055, Earth's remaining functional governments had ceased issuing coordinated policy statements. Communications from major capitals became erratic, then silent. The last verified transmission from the United Nations headquarters in New York was recorded on March 17, 2055. It consisted of an automated distress beacon, repeating for 72 hours before ceasing.
The stage was set. The arks were ready. Earth, for those who remained, had become uninhabitable. ACT-2. The
protocol was not improvised. Documents recovered from the Space Infrastructure Coalition archives indicate planning began as early as 2047, 2 years before the first reported cases of the Aschenfeld Agent. The protocol outlined procedures for the preservation of human civilization in the event of planetary-scale catastrophe. The protocol's framework was deterministic. Selection criteria prioritized genetic viability, technical competence, and institutional knowledge. Emotional or familial considerations were explicitly excluded. The stated objective was survival of the species, not the preservation of individual lives. Orbital construction proceeded with industrial efficiency. Modified Starship-class vessels were assembled in low Earth orbit using modular components. Each ark was designed to sustain up to 200 individuals for extended interplanetary transit, with redundant life support, power generation, and propulsion systems. The arks incorporated closed-cycle environmental systems that recycled water and atmosphere with high efficiency. Hydroponic farming modules provided caloric intake sufficient for long-duration missions. Radiation shielding combined polymer composites with magnetic field generators to mitigate solar and cosmic radiation exposure. Propulsion systems utilized methane-oxygen engines selected for reliability and fuel density. The selection process was executed with bureaucratic precision. Algorithms evaluated millions of individuals based on health metrics, skill sets, psychological profiles, and reproductive viability. Final selections were made by committee, though the identities of committee members remain partially redacted in declassified documents. Among those selected were individuals whose names had been publicly associated with space exploration and technology development. Private aerospace executives secured passage alongside government scientists and military personnel. The presence of political figures and their families was documented in manifest logs, though specific names were redacted under national security provisions. Public awareness of the selection process was minimal. Media coverage focused on optimistic narratives of interplanetary expansion. Internal communications, however, described the operation as a lifeboat scenario, with explicit acknowledgement that the majority of Earth's population would not survive. Training for selected personnel was accelerated. Candidates underwent medical evaluations, psychological conditioning, and technical instruction. Families were relocated to secure facilities under the pretense of pre-launch quarantine. Communication with external contacts was restricted. Launch preparations were completed by mid-2054. Orbital staging areas house thousands of individuals awaiting final departure. The departure sequence was planned as a phased operation. Initial launches carried crew and essential equipment. Subsequent flights delivered additional personnel and backup systems. Each launch window was calculated to optimize fuel efficiency and minimize transit time. Public perception of these launches remained positive. Media coverage highlighted the bravery of those departing for Mars. Footage of families waving farewell at launch sites was broadcast globally. What was not shown were the armed perimeters, the restricted access zones, and the individuals turned away at checkpoints. Internal reports documented significant logistical challenges. Food production aboard orbital platforms fell short of projections, requiring rationing. Water recycling systems experienced periodic failures. Psychological evaluations identified elevated stress levels among crew members. Despite these difficulties, the operation proceeded on schedule. By late 2054, the first fully crewed Ark departed Earth orbit on a trajectory toward Mars. Additional launches followed at intervals determined by orbital mechanics and resource availability. Earth's situation continued to deteriorate. Urban infrastructure failures accelerated. Power grids collapsed. Water treatment facilities ceased operation. Medical facilities were abandoned. In rural areas, survivors attempted to maintain agricultural production, but coordination was minimal. Harvest yields dropped. Famine became widespread. Official communications from terrestrial governments became increasingly sporadic. The last coordinated international broadcast occurred in December 2054, announcing continued efforts to combat the pathogen. No further updates followed. Satellite monitoring indicated that major population centers were largely abandoned. Thermal imaging showed minimal heat signatures consistent with human habitation. The final Ark departed Earth orbit on February 9th, 2055. On board were the last personnel selected under the Contingency Protocol, along with genetic samples, seed banks, and digital archives containing humanity's accumulated knowledge. The departure was not announced publicly. Ground control ceased transmissions shortly thereafter. Earth, for those who remained, was silent.
Act 3. The Crossing.
The journey to Mars required approximately 7 months. Ark-class vessels maintained continuous acceleration during the initial phase, followed by a coast period and final deceleration upon approach to Martian orbit. Life aboard was regimented, with daily schedules dictating sleep cycles, meals, exercise, and maintenance tasks. Environmental systems operated within acceptable parameters. Atmospheric processors maintained oxygen and nitrogen levels. Carbon dioxide scrubbers removed waste gases. Water recyclers purified condensation and biological waste. Hydroponic modules produced fresh vegetables, supplementing stored rations. Radiation exposure was monitored continuously. Solar activity remained within predicted ranges. Occasional flares triggered automated warnings, prompting crew members to retreat to shielded compartments. Cumulative exposure remained below established thresholds. Psychological challenges were significant. Confined spaces, limited privacy, and constant proximity created tensions. Counseling sessions were conducted regularly. Some crew members adapted well. Others struggled. Behavioral incidents were documented, with interventions ranging from mediation to pharmaceutical treatment. Communications with Earth were maintained during the early phase of transit. Initial transmissions confirmed that ground control was operational. Updates reported continued efforts to stabilize terrestrial conditions, though specifics were vague. By April 2055, 3 months into the journey, transmissions from Earth became irregular. Content shifted from operational updates to terse acknowledgments. Requests for clarification went unanswered. The last transmission from Earth was received on May 3rd, 2055. It consisted of automated telemetry data from a weather satellite. No human-generated content accompanied the data. Subsequent attempts to establish contact failed. Crew members were informed that communication difficulties were due to equipment malfunctions. Privately, mission logs recorded the implications. Earth was presumed lost. The arks were on their own. Navigation systems continued to function without external input. Automated course corrections maintained trajectory toward Mars. Fuel consumption remained within projected parameters. Onboard life continued. Maintenance crews conducted inspections. Agricultural teams tended crops. Medical personnel conducted health evaluations. Exercise protocols were mandatory. Crew members spent 2 hours daily on resistance machines, mitigating bone density loss and muscle atrophy. Social activities were encouraged to maintain morale. Group meals were scheduled. Entertainment libraries provided films, music, and literature. The journey was not without incident. Micrometeoroid impacts were detected on several occasions, though none penetrated the hull. Life support experienced temporary malfunctions, corrected through diagnostic protocols. No casualties occurred during transit. As the arks approached Mars, preparations for orbital insertion began. Navigation computers calculated entry trajectories. Crew members reviewed landing procedures. Landing sites had been selected years in advance based on satellite imagery and robotic surveys. Mars appeared first as a point of light. Gradually it grew, resolving into a disk, then a sphere. Surface features emerged: canyons, mountains, craters. Orbital insertion was executed without complication. Engines fired on schedule, decelerating the arks into stable orbit. From orbit, the planet spread below, vast and alien. Surface temperatures average minus 60 degrees Celsius. Atmospheric pressure was less than 1% of Earth's. Landing preparations commenced. Descent vehicles were checked and fueled. The first landing was scheduled for July 12, 2055, targeting a site in Gale Crater. The descent was tense. Atmospheric entry generated heat and turbulence. parachutes deployed at predetermined altitudes, retro rockets fired in the final phase. Telemetry confirmed successful landing. Crew members felt the pull of Martian gravity for the first time. Outside, the landscape was desolate. Red dust stretched to the horizon. The sky was pale ochre. No sound existed beyond the hum of life support systems. Mars was silent. Habitat modules were deployed. Airlocks were tested. Power systems came online. Water extraction equipment began thermal sublimation of subsurface ice. The first crew member stepped onto Martian soil without ceremony. There were no speeches, no flags. Mission logs recorded arrival time, location coordinates, initial observations. The focus was operational. Additional landings followed. The colony began to take shape. Interconnected modules, surrounded by solar panels, antennas, and excavation equipment. Robotic vehicles moved across the surface. Earth was 300 million kilometers away. Silent, unreachable.
Act 4. The Foothold.
By late 2055, the Martian colony was operational. 340 individuals inhabited pressurized modules, sustained by life support systems, hydroponic agriculture, and water extracted from subsurface ice. Daily routines were established. Crew rotations ensured continuous monitoring. Agricultural teams managed crop cycles. Maintenance personnel conducted inspections. Martian gravity, 38% of Earth's, required physiological adaptation. Bone density loss stabilized. Cardiovascular systems adjusted. Physical conditioning remained mandatory. Resource acquisition was critical. Water extraction proceeded continuously. Oxygen was produced through electrolysis and chemical processing of atmospheric carbon dioxide. Food production relied on hydroponic systems. Expansion was gradual. Additional modules were assembled from prefabricated components. Tunnels connected structures. Underground facilities were excavated, providing shielded spaces. Scientific exploration began cautiously. Robotic rovers collected samples and mapped geological features. Manned expeditions ventured short distances, documenting surface conditions. The Martian environment was harsh. Dust storms could last weeks. Temperature fluctuations strained equipment. No anomalies were detected during the initial months. Mars appeared geologically dormant. Surface features suggested ancient water flow. Subsurface radar scans indicated extensive ice reserves. By early 2056, the colony had achieved stability. Life support operated within design parameters. Agricultural output met caloric requirements. Social cohesion was maintained through structured routines. Communications with Earth were not re-established. Satellite imagery showed atmospheric changes consistent with ecological collapse. Nighttime light emissions from urban centers were absent. The silence was definitive. The colony was alone. Mission directives shifted from contingency survival to permanent establishment. Long-term planning addressed resource sustainability and generational continuity. In mid-2056, the first subsurface anomaly was detected. Seismic sensors recorded unusual vibrations deep beneath the colony. The patterns were irregular, inconsistent with natural tectonic activity. Ground-penetrating radar revealed cavities at depths exceeding 2 kilometers. The structures appeared geometric, inconsistent with known lava tube formations. A decision was made to investigate using robotic probes. The probes descended through natural fissures. The cavities were extensive, branching into networks of tunnels. Walls exhibited smooth surfaces, not eroded, but formed. Temperature readings were warmer than surface conditions. At a depth of 3 kilometers, the probes detected organic material. Chemical analysis identified complex carbon compounds. Biological origin was probable. The structures resembled fungal networks, though no terrestrial analog matched the scale. Further exploration revealed movement, slow, undulating motions. Video feeds captured tendrils, extending and retracting. Thermal imaging showed metabolic activity. The discovery was met with caution. Protocols for biological containment were reviewed. No samples were brought to the surface initially. Remote observation continued. In late 2057, an expedition team descended to investigate directly. Environmental suits were equipped with additional seals. The descent took hours. Communication was maintained via fiber optic cable. At depth, the team encountered the structures. Tendrils, pale and translucent, filled the cavities. Movement ceased upon arrival, as if sensing their presence. Samples were collected using sterile instruments, stored in sealed containers. Upon return, contamination protocols were followed. The samples were placed in isolated containment. Preliminary analysis confirmed biological activity. Genetic sequencing revealed no match to known Earth-based life. Debate arose regarding the implications. Were these organisms native to Mars? Evidence of independent biogenesis? No definitive answers emerged. In early 2058, anomalies in crew health were reported. Several individuals exhibited unusual symptoms: fatigue, cognitive impairment, visual distortions. Medical evaluations found no pathogenic cause. The symptoms persisted, worsening over weeks. Correlation with the subsurface organisms was suspected. Biohazard procedures were intensified. Affected individuals were isolated. One crew member reported hallucinations. Figures moving outside the habitat modules. Psychological evaluation suggested stress-induced psychosis. Medication was administered. The hallucinations ceased temporarily, then resumed. Other crew members began reporting similar experiences. Shadows in peripheral vision, whispers in empty corridors. Objects moved from their positions. The subsurface organisms exhibited changes. Growth accelerated. Tendrils extended. Chemical emissions were detected, volatiles that evaporated rapidly. Analysis suggested psychoactive properties. Ventilation systems were inspected. Traces of the compounds were found in air circulation. The organisms were releasing substances that penetrated containment and spread through the colony. Contamination was widespread. Efforts to purge the compounds failed. The organisms had adapted. Behavioral changes intensified. Crew members became withdrawn. Sleep patterns disrupted. Aggression surfaced. Medical staff were overwhelmed. In mid-2058, communication from the colony ceased. Automated systems continued transmitting telemetry, but human-generated messages stopped. Orbital satellites showed normal heat signatures, indicating life support remained functional, yet no contact was made. Automated landing probes were dispatched. They found the colony intact, structures undamaged, equipment operational, but no crew members were visible. Interiors appeared orderly. Food supplies remained. Personal effects were undisturbed. The crew had vanished. Further investigation found no bodies, no signs of violence, no indication of evacuation. Life support logs showed continuous habitation until the silence. Then, abruptly, activity ceased. The subsurface structures showed continued growth. Tendrils had extended upward, penetrating regolith, approaching the surface. Thermal activity increased. The Martian colony, humanity's first foothold beyond Earth, had been lost. Not to environmental hazards, not to equipment failure, but to something indigenous. Something that had waited beneath the surface until disturbed. The orbital archives recorded the events with clinical precision. No conclusions were drawn, no explanations offered. The data was preserved, transmitted to automated satellites for long-term storage. Centuries later, when humanity returned to Mars, the records would be recovered. They would find empty modules, dust-covered equipment, and beneath, in the deep places, the tendrils waiting. End of record.